So we actually do have a theist on the line. So we're going to go to Dominic in California. Pronouns are he, him, and wants to talk about that there's an underlying higher power than man that created the universe, and there's an objective moral standard we must adhere to. And the claim is that you have evidence, something that justifies the belief, and is not just that you hold the proposition to be true. And I'm really, really looking forward to that. So, Dominic, what say you?
Yeah, hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
So, that's great. I'm good as well. So, I was going to present my initial argument in about four sections and then go from there. The first
sure. What do you when you mean sections? They're not like big giants that because we do have a show to run another caller. So is there any way you can
be as brief as possible?
Awesome. That'd be great.
Take notes. Four things.
All right.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So first I'm going to talk about the purpose of life and why we're here. Then I'm going to talk about natural law. Then I'm going to tell you about the scientific experiments conducted that support what I'm talking about. And then very briefly, in a couple sentences, I'm going to describe what that means.
Okay.
So the purpose of life can be summed up pretty much in one word: evolution. We were put here in the physical realm to evolve consciousness to new heights. And we do this physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The way we evolve is by doing things.
Can I ask a question? I got to ask a question.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot that'll be said if we don't kind of try to go a little bit at a time.
I have one too.
Yeah. So I agree evolution exists. I agree allele frequencies change in populations. Cool. How did you actually determine that there is an intrinsic purpose to life and that being it, right? Because you stated that you believe that's the case and you think it's true, but I'm missing the justification part. So what's the justification for that?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, yeah, evolution is happening, but how do we?
I'll just get straight to the scientific evidence then, and then explain these positions if that will help you then.
Sure. I also have a question. Do you think though that science? Well, let me ask you a question because it's going to be important. Do you think science is going to determine intrinsic purpose and values? Because we might be in a really big disagreement already, right? Because I'm going to need to know how you think science gets to intrinsic purpose, because that sounds like pseudoscience to me, and I just we need to clarify that, right?
Okay, well, maybe if I explain the experiments, it'll help.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the first experiment is called the water experiment or the snowflake experiment, and this was done by a dude named.
Yeah, I am very familiar with that. You do realize that is like one of the most highly sourced things from spiritualists. This is where you speak into the water, it freezes, right? And it does it based on like the vibrations, right? You do realize that is entirely contested within any other scientific field, right? Like anyone that's actually gone to look at that paper, like there's not a peer-reviewed study that confirms that. The reason people contest it
is because their ego is in the way.
Okay, so what's the justification, right? So what's like when that experiment was done? Can you name me what the control was?
What the control?
Yeah, I'm just curious on you, because if you're using this, then presumably you have a
water. Okay, I'll give you one example of what he did for an experiment.
No, I'm asking you what the control of the experiment was.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so we're already on a rocky start. So, like, how are we going to rule out that what could be the case when we peer review this type of experiment, right? Like, how are we going to, if the replication process isn't going to be important, like, to you to know how I would be able to go and replicate it so I can test this in the future, see if it actually corresponds to what your controls are, right? Then we're already going to be in a rocky territory.
Okay. One of the experiments he did was he took 2 containers of water and he put notes on them. I don't know if you're familiar with this particular experiment. One of the notes he wrote was, "I hate you, I'm going to kill you." And one of the notes he wrote on the other one was, "Thank you." And so he let them sit overnight, and then he eventually, the next morning, froze them and observed them under a certain type of microscope. I can't remember exactly what type of microscope it was. And that's how he came to the conclusion that water on the molecular level is affected by thoughts and vibrations. And I'm sure this is something scientists can do today. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. So do you understand?
Mike, okay, so here's where my brain goes with this is I find myself wondering what does the water experiment have to do? I mean, because when I'm looking at the call screener notes here, it says there is an underlying power. I'm going to need you to listen to me, okay? So I'm just going to mute you really quick because this is important. We got to have a back and forth. I'm going to listen to you too. It says there's an underlying higher power than man that created the universe. There's an objective moral standard we must adhere to. I have evidence. So I don't understand how the water experiment, where does this go? If I were to say, okay, water responds to our emotions, which I'm not convinced of, but if I was to just grant that, then what?
Well, I was going to try and add the proper context. I talked about evolution, but then I was going to talk about after evolution, where the objective moral standard comes in. And the objective moral standard is something called natural law. Now, I'm going to define natural law so there's absolutely as little confusion on it as possible. And this is not my definition. It has nothing to do with Darwin's theories. Natural law is a universal, non-man-made, binding and immutable conditions that govern the consequences of behavior. Natural law is a body of universal spiritual laws which act as the governing dynamics of consciousness.
You just used the word spiritual. Well, I don't understand.
Yes.
What is spiritual about? I mean, it sounds to me like I could just say that reality has certain properties. We observe that, certain actions have certain consequences here in reality. Where is the spiritual element to any of that?
The spiritual element is the fact that the actions that cause harm in the universe are not wrong because man says they're wrong. They're wrong because that is the way creation was made, so that these actions are wrong.
Well, how do you know? Okay, so how do you know that?
And they're
why do you think that?
They're wrong. They're wrong because they directly interfere with the purpose of life, which is consciousness. And I'm going to explain to you the 7 wrongs. There are 7 wrongs in one.
No. You got to stop, because I can tell that there's a lot. You have a lot of stuff that you're trying to get out, but you're going to get ahead of yourself. Okay, we got to deal with certain things sort of on a foundational level. You're saying things are wrong because they violate some spiritual, natural set of laws. I don't know of any reason why I would think that that's true. I don't have any reason to think that morality is anything other than a human invention. So maybe we can just deal with that before going on to anything else.
Okay, well, can you say why no one wants to be murdered or raped or assaulted? Why is that inherent in just about every human being who's a normal human being, that none of them want those things done to them?
Well, it's interesting that you're putting these qualifiers on it. I'm going to answer your question. It sounds to me like you are acknowledging in the way that you formed that question that there are people who would love to be killed, who would love to be assaulted, even people who have like non-consensual sex fantasies and stuff, right? So these aren't universals that you're talking about.
And I said normal people, implying that the people who don't think that, there's something wrong with them.
What's wrong with them? How are we making that assessment?
That they're either sadists, because if they really want such acts to be done to them, or they want to go and commit acts, then they're sadists or masochists.
I'm not sure that's true. I did MMA for like 20 years, and there are, as part of me training to fight, as part of me training to fight, as part of me trying to fight, stop interrupting me. Okay. I want to be respectful to you, but you got to give it to get it. Okay. So there were parts of my training where I would want people to assault me, to batter me, because it was part of what I was trying to do. It wasn't because I was a sadist. How are you determining what's normal?
What's normal is because these are the acts of transgressions against free will. When you are directly doing any of the three acts that I said, you are directly interfering with another person's free will, and free will is what evolves consciousness.
Not if they want you to do something to them.
As I said, if they really want you to do something to them, there's something wrong with them. Because no sane human being wants to be murdered or have their loved ones murdered.
Well, I think that I've realized where we're at here. You're making lots of claims, and
he hasn't substantiated a single one.
That's not a single thing.
But
yeah. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. So one of the issues I have is like, so what you're saying, like, you have to understand, like, you might have some intuition that you're saying, and I part of it, I had to come in here at the back end. But when you say, right, that there is like this phenomena of, people can be murdered, right, and therefore no one ought to hurt someone or murder someone, I'm in agreement with you, right? That's like my moral standard or something, or anything like that, right? But the problem is when you're like, earlier you're invoking science and things, when you're trying to get to values, here's an issue. If smoking causes cancer, right? Not very contestable, right? Smoking causes cancer. We don't just go, right, okay, premise one, people smoke cigarettes. Premise two, cigarettes causes cancer. Conclusion, we ought not smoke cigarettes, right? That doesn't logically follow. Why? Because you subsume a value in the conclusion that isn't in your premises, right? How you would actually logically conclude that argument was you would go, premise one, people smoke cigarettes. Premise two, smoking cigarettes causes cancer. Premise three, people ought to care about their health, right? That's a premise that you can go, do I accept that premise? I don't care about my health. So then the conclusion clearly doesn't follow for you that you ought not smoke. Because some people, I know people that want to smoke in their life, right? They don't want to quit smoking. I don't agree with them, obviously, but I can't take their value and say, you ought not do this thing. Now, in terms of like well-being, right? And we go to these things like murder, or these extreme examples, it's the same thing for the Christian as it is for anybody else. We're concerned with our well-being. That's what's like, what we almost all have this innate ability to be concerned with our well-being. Saying that it's an objective thing that we can therefore have to, like, we ought do certain things is where you get sticky. But what I will say is that everybody holds this principle, right? People are going to be inconsistent. What does a Christian want to do when they go to heaven, right? They want to go to heaven because it affects their well-being. They don't want to go to hell because it affects their well-being. They burn in hell, right? So we all use the same principle, but you can't just say it's objective and then therefore it goes to like your position with God. Because I'm going to sit here and argue with you that you use well-being or things like that prior to this objective feature, right?
Can I clarify this? Can I clarify something?
Of course.
Most people seem to think that the goal for our moral system should be well-being, and those people are absolutely wrong. If you think well-being should be the goal for our moral system, I hate to tell you, you have a very limited worldview, because our goal should
Dominic.
Wait, Mike, let him go here. So because he's saying right now that our goals should be something, that it is conducive to our well-being for our goals to be something, and he's going to explain how doing this thing that's good for our well-being is what's moral, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm going. Yeah. It's not well-being. The goal is freedom.
Okay. Is freedom conducive to our well-being? Why should we want freedom?
No, freedom is not conducive to our well-being, unfortunately. Freedom is realizing that death is around every corner, and the truly free man embraces and accepts death and removes themselves from the physical. They realize it's only temporary.
I have no idea what any of that means.
Yeah, look, this is just sloppy to say, just to say that it's freedom, because what do you do when your sense of justice is in, in contest with something like your sense of mercy and justice, right? Morality takes things more than just like, I have freedom. You have dilemmas that are going to arise, right? This is why there's like trolley problems to show issues with people that might take a utilitarian or a consequential approach, right? And they point these things out because it's easy just to say it's freedom or it's well-being, but we can always derive these like moral dilemmas where you're going to end up contradicting yourself, right? Or being inconsistent with your principle. I'm just telling you now, like, you believe in a God, right? Your notes say that it comes from the higher power, right?
Yes, there's 100% there is a God.
Okay,
100%.
Let me give you a scenario, 100%. Right? Two possible worlds, Dominic, right? Possible world where somebody kills somebody, right? Just cold-blooded,
right?
No reason at all. God exists in that world. Presumably you think it's wrong. Their freedom was infringed upon, okay?
Right.
World B, there's no God. The same action happens. Is that now somehow no longer, like, is that now okay? Is it just in virtue? Because no, answer the question. Is it okay in world B? Is it okay in world B? The same actions are done. There's just no God, right? Is that now wrong? Or I'm sorry, is that now right?
Well, it would depend on the circumstance.
It would depend.
Created.
So you don't hold. So you do not hold freedom as your standard. No, Dominic, you don't hold. I'm cutting you off because you don't hold. You can't come in here, say that you hold freedom as the standard, and then when I give an example of two situations where someone's freedom, right, is being imposed upon, the difference on why it might depend, it has to do with the God you believe in, right? Not the freedom. Freedom has fuck all to do with it.
Yeah.
It's only good because there's this sky dad above it. Right? That's not what makes something okay. The action and the consequences that happen in both scenarios affects victims and people in both cases. A God watching it or instantiating the world be damned, right? So you clearly don't think freedom is the foundation, right? So what do you actually think? Because we just exposed that that's not the case.
No, I still think freedom is the case, because when you say world B, that's, to me at least, implying that we're in an entirely different universe under a completely different objective standards. So if you're comparing world B to this world,
standard is freedom, is what you said, and there's freedom in both those worlds.
Yes.
So what are you talking about? Right? Where's the asymmetry?
Well, then in that case, yeah, murder would be wrong in murder B.
Yes, because the asymmetry that you want to derive has to do in virtue of the God being in one of the worlds and not in the other. Has fuck all to do with freedom. But you want to double down on that for some reason.
No, it has everything to do with freedom.
Okay, so where's the asymmetry?
Where's the asymmetry? Just really quick, just to help with this, can you do me a favor and just define like morality? Like, what is morality under your view?
Morality is objectively right behavior and objectively wrong behavior. Right actions and wrong actions. That's what morality is.
You're talking about
determined by human beings.
You're talking about adherence to these laws that you're asserting exist?
Yes.
So is there any distinction at all between morality and obedience to these laws?
These laws to morality are the only things that can generate the maximum amount of freedom. So in a sense, being obedient to these laws is the only way to free ourselves. These are the only things to submit to in existence.
And these laws come from God. Just out of curiosity, is there a specific God here that you believe in?
I don't believe in any religions. I think that every religion has a little bit of truth to tell, and I think it's our job to put all those truths together to form the most coherent story.
So, okay, so can you give me an example of a morally wrong action?
Okay, I'll tell you the 7 acts of transgression. Murder.
I just asked for one. So murder.
I didn't ask for 7.
So murder would be an example of a objectively wrong act, right?
Yes, except in self-defense. Self-defense is the other half of the non-aggression principle. That's very important to understand. And when you were using your MMA example, I was going to try and explain that that is an example of self-defense and totally within your rights. Because
totally not self-defense. It's violence for sport.
Rights,
it's not self-defense. It's violence for sport. Yeah.
Well, you're still consenting to it, so it's not assault.
Okay, so I think I probably run into problems here because my brain was permanently altered when I went to law school. So when I hear someone use terms like assault and murder, to me they mean specific things. So when I hear murder, my brain goes killing somebody in a way that is outside of the boundaries of the law. And there's degrees, of course, to murder, right? Under your view, are there degrees? I mean, I'm wondering how this shakes out, because I have a hard time thinking of actions that are just like universally objectively wrong. Everything to me seems to be conditional and situational.
There are no degrees. You can think of it as like a keyboard. When you enter a command in the computer, say your finger accidentally stumbles on a command and presses enter. The computer doesn't care or even know that you stumbled upon the keyboard and entered in a false command.
That's very interesting to me. So in your view, if somebody were to say, be texting while driving and lose control of their car and kill a pedestrian, would that be equal, morally speaking, to like premeditated killing?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. It's something that we've struggled for answering these questions. That's what progress and trial and error are. To the Greeks would say, yes, manslaughter and murder were the same thing. But however, today, such an act of negligence, like texting and driving and actually killing someone, that's just an act of negligence and should be dealt with accordingly. I don't know exactly what that is. I think about what would be the appropriate humanly consequences that we should do to these actions. But
why do you think it is
the universe?
Why do you think it is that our entire, and not just us, but just like all over the planet, that when societies are structuring legal systems, that we do think about things in terms of the consequences that our actions have on other people and not in terms of a spiritual law?
Because humanity has turned into moral relativists.
Why?
Because they think that we ultimately get to decide what is right and wrong, and that we ultimately get to punish it. It's ultimately a form of control. That's all the man's laws are.
Why do we think that?
Why what?
Because I think that we as a species are responsible for figuring out what's right and what's wrong in terms of what's going to be optimal for getting along with each other. So why would I think that there's something else?
I would say that we're the only species who could think of those things. No other animal could. And what we need.
So what?
It's very difficult to provide evidence. I tried doing the water experiment. I was also going to talk about the double slit experiment.
Neither of those things have neither of those things have anything to do with whether or not we have reason to think that there's some external moral lawgiver.
Yeah, and also this is my issue, Dominic. Dominic, really quick. This is my issue. I've been trying to bite my tongue on this. As my position is, if it comes from your God, right? It comes from the nature of your God is good. It cannot be objective. It is inherently subjective, right? Because what is it constitutive of? It's constitutive of the properties that your God has. And if I just have a different God, right, with different properties, let's say it's similar to yours, but in the trolley problem, it decides to save 1 instead of the 5, right? And then my God chooses 1 over the 5. Your God chooses 5 over 1. We have one different moral decision within these gods. What's the contradiction in my God existing, right? I mean, this is just an assertion that your God has the standard, right? But if I rival yours with some other God that makes one different moral decision, or an evil God, right? You have to give me at least some deductive argument, right, that shows that there's a contradiction entailed when I posit any other type of God. Otherwise, if it flows from its nature, it could flow from any set of properties, just like what I think's right flows from me, and what Kenneth thinks right flows from him. But there's a difference in society when we come together and go, how does this affect us, right? And we come to that. But it's to say that it comes from a God when in some possible world it could be a different God that determines the good. It could be an evil God that determines the good, right? So what would be the contradiction in a God that's not your God that determines the good? If you can't provide a contradiction in it, then it's not objective, right?
Let me be clear. So you think that because God decides morality, that it is ultimately subjective to God?
It's not about deciding. Even if it's about deciding or commands, that's going to internally flow from its nature. What I'm saying is, if you think that God determines the good in any way that you think he determines the good, right? If it's independent of God, then we don't need the God, right? Obviously. But if you think the good is instantiated from the God's nature or from his commands, any one of those things, right? That's going to be based on the properties God has, right? And if I rival to you a different God that just makes one different moral decision, right? If we're on a par with each other, right? We're at a race. We're seeing like which God is the one that determines the morality, like the objective morality. But if we're stuck in the race at the same spot, we haven't finished, and I ask you, well, what's the contradiction entailed by me positing this other God, right? Because yours has to be metaphysically necessary, right? Has to be objective. There couldn't be another world where it's any different, where any other moral decision is different. Otherwise, it will be subjective. So if you can't give me a contradiction in the God or view that I propose to you, then you have a subjective metaethical thesis, right? You have to show why it's necessary that those properties determine the good, right? That requires an argument. You're just saying it does. But I've been waiting the whole time for justification on why the thing you believe in is the only thing that could instantiate what the good is. So what is the argument for that?
Well, okay, I'll use an example of
no example. What is the justification? What is the argument? I'm done. We're gonna move on to other callers. If I don't get a justification or an argument, I'm moving on to another caller. Just please give a justification. You've said a lot of things and you've given nothing justificatory. Nothing, not one thing.
Yeah, like I don't have any reason to think that anything that you're saying about God's natural law is anything other than your intuitions. Like you're looking at the universe and saying, I think that this is how the universe should be, therefore God.
Yeah, and I think things too in my head, but what actually shows that that's reflective of reality, right? Because I thought things about this other God that determines the good. You thought things about the determines. So we both have imaginations. That's great. We've established we both have imaginations. How do you actually get that out of your imagination and being reflective of reality? Well, you got a couple options. One, you can derive contradictions in any other God that would determine the good. And how you do that is by presenting an argument or evidence. But we don't have that.
Yeah.
The only way you can really come to a proper understanding of what God is if you remove your mindset and worldviews from the physical, stop looking at what we as humans have created, and
we're getting into snake oil territory.
Yeah, this is now we're in bullshit territory.
Yeah, like if I have to tell you to remove, like, look, Dominic, this is trivial. This is so trivial. If I believe in something and I can demonstrate it, I don't need to tell you to like remove yourself and like delude yourself, or you have to believe in it or accept the placebo effect, right? That's what con men rely on to fool people, right? It's a very successful. Look at any cult that starts in the self-help realm, right? That's exactly what they get on you. Remove yourself. I know what I'm saying sounds so wrong, but that's exactly what's the problem, right? Because that's what it's designed to do. You're supposed to hear this and it's supposed to sound so wrong. No, if it's true, it doesn't fear investigation and you can provide the justification, right? I mean, am I saying anything that's batshit crazy, or am I right?
I'm kind of having a hard time understanding exactly what you're saying.
Give justification for the claim that you think is true. Yeah. What is hard about that?
The justification is the objective harm that it causes in the reality that we live in.
That is
Okay,
question.
hold on. Let me try running something with you, Dominic, because you can find competing religions all over the world who believe that where you have people believing in various gods where they think that they've been handed some moral truth or some sort of moral laws from these gods, and they'll say that things are harmful. Okay, the easy thing that comes to mind for me right now is that there are people who will look at my trans friends, who will look at my gay friends, and say that what they're doing is harmful, and they justify that by saying that this assessment comes from a god. Why should anybody think that what they're saying is true?
Because what I'm saying are the acts of transgressions against free will, undeniably. Every single one of the wrongs that I've mentioned causes harm in some objective way.
Okay, but what I'm trying to get you to see here is that there are millions of people who will say the exact same stuff that you're saying, just asserting that there's harm somewhere without justifying why it's harmful or how they know that this assessment of harm came from a god.
Yeah, and when you say objective, by the way, when you say I see it in an objective way, that's question begging because you're assuming the thing that we don't agree with you, which is this objective standard that you've still yet not proven, right? So it's just question begging. You're just using your view like, well, it's clearly objective. Yeah, well, you haven't substantiated the objective part either, right?
Okay,
yeah.
Well, if I can go back to the two scientific experiments and what I think they ultimately mean, both the water experiment and the double slit experiment, and I know you were going to go on about the double slit experiment. I don't know what you were going to say, but what they cannot explain.
No, we're not going on.
Just get to what they mean. What do they mean?
We're not quantum physicists here, and if you're not either, we're not going to talk about the double slit experiment.
Okay, they ultimately mean that the universe around us is influenced by conscious observation, and it objectively knows when we humans are doing right and wrong. That's what
he's invoking the observer effect, and it's just a misunderstanding. Like, look, I'm not a quantum physicist. You're not a quantum physicist. We're not going to talk about this because we're just all going to look really dumb in virtue of people that are like cringing who actually are in this field, right? So, but one thing that I will say on it, look into the observer effect and see what people actually say about a particle being entangled or our observations having to, I'm not tangled, I'm sorry, interacted with, right? We have to actually interact. The observer effect, like it changes. That's where you're going. I don't want to go into the woo-woo. Like, that's just, you're not a quantum physicist. I'm not a quantum physicist. Well, let me ask you, Dominic, are you a quantum physicist?
Maybe he is.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, no, so do you have a prerequisite knowledge in like anything like in physics at all?
No, but do I need to?
Yeah, so we shouldn't go into quantum physics, right? Because what is quantum physics? It's purely based on the mathematics.
Did you just
a mathematician?
Dominic, did you say, do I need to?
Yeah, because when you say that someone needs to have a degree to know something,
nobody said degree. Nobody said
degree.
Nobody said degree. Nobody said degree.
Okay, well, we'll say scholarly training.
Dominic, I don't even care about what you're about to say with that because you've already told me you don't have even prerequisite knowledge in just general physics. So why the hell am I going to listen to you about quantum physics, right? I'm not going to do that. So clearly, if you don't have the prerequisite knowledge in physics and you're going to use quantum physics to substantiate your claim, right? Do you not see the issue in that, right? Like you think this thing proves like the most important question in the world, yet you've like not even picked up a fucking physics book.
Look, yes, I have. I never said I never took any physics. I just said I never took any quantum physics. I believe that's what you asked me.
I asked if you had any prerequisite knowledge in physics, and you answered no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you said quantum.
That's fine. I mean,
let's just drill down on this for a second, because Dominic, the mistake that you seem to be making, and I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're doing, but you're looking at a couple of experiments. You're looking at the slit double wave thing experiment, right? And you're looking at the water experiment, and you think that there's some link between observation and how particles perform and behave. You don't understand how or why this happens, right?
I have some level, but it's not as great as, you know, a quantum physicist, obviously.
Okay, so so the short answer there is yeah. So you don't understand how or why these things happen, but you're making big ass claims about the how and why these things happen. You're claiming that there's some entity here. You're claiming, I mean, you're making big claims without knowing what you're talking about. Do you think there's a problem with that?
Okay, I'll tell you what. We'll let you get to other callers, but before I go, I'll tell you.
Well, please answer that one question. Please answer that one question. Do you think it's a problem for somebody to make big claims without knowing what they're talking about?
No, because I do know what I'm talking about.
Okay, so yet every time that you have an opportunity to show that you know what you're talking about, you don't give something that justifies the belief. That's fine.
Dominic, have you ever heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I think I have.
Okay, listen back to the call, and you tell me. You go back over, okay, and look at this. Go look over and look at what right. So I don't really take knowledge as justified true belief. I know there's issues with that, but let's just say that's like the pretty standard definition, right? So you have a belief and you think it's true. Go back over and listen to that and tell me if you gave me the third component of justification, or if you just kept telling me that you have a belief about something and you think it's true, right? Go back and look at that, because that's all I heard. That's the only thing I heard. I never heard one thing that justifies it. I heard you just say, you pointed to things like, well, there's quantum mechanics. And when I asked you about knowledge, you're like, well, I don't really know those things. So I'm not even going to how am I going to let you use that as justification if you're like already admitting you don't know what you're talking about in that field? Right? Clearly, it can't be. I
did try to say those things, and then you were the ones who said I didn't know what I was talking about. I tried to explain.
I asked you, and you gave me an answer.
Matter is influenced. Yeah, I tried explaining how matter was influenced by.
Were you invoking the observer effect, or were you not?
This is what they say about that. And then I try explaining to you that the universe does objectively know when we are performing right and wrong behavior, and I explain why these things are wrong behavior and when it is right.
So you're aware that majority of quantum physicists disagree with you then, right? You're aware of that, right? You're aware that most of quantum physicists disagree with that, right? So you're smarter than all the other people that are actually looking at the mathematics. So the person who's never looked at the math knows the answer, as opposed to the other people who are actually engaging with the fucking math, right? That's what you're saying right now, live to everybody. That's what you're saying.
These people can never come to the proper conclusion by just looking at the math and the hard facts. They don't even have.
So I went ahead and dropped the call on Dominic, because we're not going to waste time for other people that can.
I was listening to a talk not that long ago where a physicist was talking about like the level of math that you need to be competent in to basically just enter the conversation with respect to something like quantum physics. And like none of the people who I hear speaking super confidently about anything related to quantum physics have done any of that work of building the base competence to be able to speak intelligently. It's just, here's something that's that I don't understand, so I can use it as a catch-all for propping up my thing. Like, I can't imagine how pissed off the physicist community must be hearing this type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I hate getting into this conversation. I'm not a quantum physicist, but we do have to acknowledge that people disagree. You do realize, and quantum physicists are not holding your position on this, so that seems a little odd. I mean, you should go do the actual work and show them why they're wrong, right? Like, it would be that easy. Why call a talk heathen to tell that when you could actually somehow make a stamp in the world with what you're saying? But
this is such like a ubiquitous social problem right now of people. Like, the thing that's ringing in my head right now is people who don't know jack shit about virology, who don't know anything about vaccines, who will call and argue with someone like student Dr. Ben, who I talk to regularly, who he is working his ass off in medical school right now. The volume of work that he's doing is astounding. But any asshole who spends 5 minutes on WebMD can think that they know better. Not even WebMD usually, it's like Facebook. And like, if I could wave like a magic wand and like cure humanity of any one thing, it would be to just grant everybody some epistemic humility, to like, please, everybody, I'm begging you. Like, you remember, like, back in the day, how there were people who knew stuff and then people who kind of like didn't know stuff, and there was like a delineation there where people would recognize and be like, oh yeah, like, I don't really know about, you know, that. And the people who know about it would like talk about it, and the people who didn't know about it would mind their own business. Like, can we get back there, please?
Yeah, that's a lot of, yeah, you have to explain to people it's okay. Like, it's more embarrassing to pretend than just to say I don't know. Trust me, it's not embarrassing to say I don't know at all. I mean, you know, I never get that.